No worries.
And good to see you, Phil, and good to see you, Lolly. It's like old times. It's
Yeah.
really, really nice. Um, Most of us are familiar with the way that we conduct this table setting. Um, we begin with Chumash. We're looking at each week a small phrase of the text for the week, the Chumash for the week, the parasha for the week. We analyze it from the point of view of Rashi, and then we analyze Rashi often from the point of view of the Rebbe's Sichos, because the Rebbe spent a lot of time teaching how Rashi can be learned. It was quite unusual. You would think that everyone knows how Rashi can be studied, but the truth of the matter is, over history, that hasn't been the case. People have studied the text and then they've looked at Rashi, and yes, Rashi just comments. But to be able to ask a question on Rashi, why does Rashi speak? Because the first thing that a good teacher in a yeshiva classroom will teach his 6, 7-year-olds is, when you come to Rashi, the question you will always ask is, why does Rashi need to comment? Because Rashi only comments, he says, when there's some area that's gray. Otherwise, he lets it all flow. And therefore, sometimes we notice Rashi's commentary and we ask ourselves, why is Rashi commenting at all? It seems quite obvious what he's saying. And the answer is, there's something beyond. So when we look at the Rebbe's Sichos explaining what is beyond, we get a better understanding of what was in Rashi's mind to give us a deeper understanding of what the text said. And that's the first part of our session today. And I've chosen a particular section which looks at the appointment of judges. Remember, we're in the book of Devarim. Devarim is Moses' soliloquy. Hi, Inessa. Moses' soliloquy in terms of his last days in life. The whole book of Devarim is one continuous statement by Moshe Rabbeinu, compiling the previous 4 books. And it's just days of his death. And it's quite an amazing, as I said, I call it a soliloquy because it really is that. And he is reviewing now how he was instructed, initially advised by his father-in-law, Jethro, Yitzro, that he himself, Moses, couldn't possibly handle the totality of the Jewish peoplehood and be able to judge them, all the disputes and all the various arguments. He's only one person. And he was told, well, appoint others. And he's now recalling what were the qualifications of the judges. I notice in today's, I keep following the news to some extent, that one of the great American jurists is complaining that the judges' qualification in the United States today is getting lower and lower and lower, because some of you will know this, that judges are elected in the United States. They're not appointed. It's a majority vote. It's a popularity vote. Amazing. To be a judge, all you need to do is get yourself elected as a judge at every level of the judges except the Supreme Court. Okay, so here we have the criteria. We look at verse 13, and the criteria in verse 13, Anoshim Chachamim Unevonim. Individuals who are chachamim, chacham, wise, nevonim, navon, which also means wise, but for contrast, we use the translation insightful, although you and I at this moment couldn't possibly distinguish between what's a chacham, what's a navon, what does it mean a wise, or what does it mean insightful? We've no idea at the moment. And further qualifications, viduim l'shiftechem, and well-known individuals who are praised within their tribes. In other words, people of good name within their tribal groupings. This is the qualifications that were set. Now, interestingly, if you look a little bit further down at verse 15, he says, and I, Moses, certainly made such an appointment. I appointed such people who were Roshei Shiftechem, head of tribes, good. Anoshim Chachamim, good. Viduim, known. What about that verb, that adjective, navoin, insightful? It's missing. In verse 15, it's missing. In verse 13, he says, this is what I was instructed. At the end, he appoints people, but missing the one quality of navonim, and this is where Rashi comes to the rescue. So, if we look at the classic questions, halfway down the page, and quoting from Rashi, what does insightful, Navon, mean? And you'll recall there was a president of Israel called Navon, happened to be his name. It's a well-known Sephardi name, Navon. So Rashi says, Navon means those who can deduce one thing from another. Well, does that really help us? We said wise, that's chacham, and navon is those who can deduce one thing from another. Is that not an aspect of wisdom also? How can we here see any distinction between the terms that Rashi offers us? And yet Rashi is giving us the answer, and yet we can't see the answer. And Rashi goes on and says something quite strange. This is what Arius asked Rabbi Yossi. If you look in history, Arius happened to have been a bishop in the Roman times, a theologian. And very often in the Roman times, the leadership in Palestine at that time were very much on talking terms with the Jewish leadership. There was obviously a need to have some way of dialogue there. So one of the individuals asked Rabbi Yossi, what's the difference between Chacham and Navon? What's the difference between wise men and insightful men? Our question. Rashi's bringing this down. And Rashi answers, quoting the Talmud there again, Rabbi Yossi replied, you know what a wise man is? A wise man is like a rich money changer. When people bring him coins to examine, he examines them. When they don't bring him anything, he sits there and does nothing. An insightful man, a navon, however, is like an enterprising money changer. When they bring him coins to examine, yes, he examines them. But when they don't bring him any, he goes out and does business with his own money. He looks for business. Firstly, it's a very, very unusual analogy. I mean, here we're talking about something as profound as wisdom and insight, and Rashi is bringing us a rather parochial kind of analogy of money changers. And what does he really mean? A businessman who sits back and does nothing, and then a businessman who goes out and drums up business. And that's the difference between Chacham and Navon. Very, very strange. Don't understand what Rashi's saying there. And that's why we need to have a good look at Rashi. And then Rashi makes the second point, which I already announced to you. Did Moshe, in fact, pick any insightful men? We will look at verse 15, and we said, no, he doesn't. Why? Why does he leave out there in verse 15 that quality of Navon? Is he shortchanging us in terms of the judges? So Rashi says, putting words into Moshe Rabbeinu's mouth, very simply, I couldn't find any. Okay, that answers that. But then what is the distinction between Chacham and Navon? That one could be found and the other one couldn't be found. And that leaves us now with our adventure into the Rebbe's understanding of what Rashi is trying to tell us. And as we always do, please feel free to ask questions all along. Don't fear interruptions. So, looking lower down at Torah's Menachem, which is the particular sikha of the Rebbe's sikhas dealing with the subject. And the Rebbe says in his commentary to verse 13, Yud Gimel, where he did list the qualifications that he was going to look for, he cites the analogy used by Rabbi Yossi, which explains the distinction between wise and insightful men. This presents us with the following problem. And here comes some interesting stuff. Because if you know your Chumash, you'll be able to do exactly what the Rebbe does to Rashi here in the next phrase. In another parasha, not the one we're studying right now, in another parasha, Ki Sisa, the Torah says, look, I've appointed Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, and I have filled him with the spirit of wisdom and insight. The words there are again identical words, chacham and navon. So we see another parallel instance where these qualities were being attributed to people that needed to do the job. What was that job over there? The construction of the Mishkan. In other words, we had to find people like Bezalel, the son of Uri, who had both qualities, Chacham and Navon, to construct the Mishkan. Not that we know what the distinction is yet. Rashi comments over there, wisdom, what's that mean? What's Chacham mean? That which a person hears from others and learns. Insight, Navon, Rashi says over there in the other parasha, independently derived ideas that are concluded from things that one has been taught. Well, it's a little abstract at the moment. But at least over there, even though we haven't yet learned what this distinction means, at least over there, Rashi goes to the trouble and tells us the difference, even though we don't yet follow what that difference is. Chacham is someone who hears and learns, and Navon is someone who independently derives ideas that are concluded from things the one has already been taught. Okay? We're not clear yet, but at least we see there is a distinction. Now, since Rashi has already informed us of the meaning of the term Navon, even though it's not yet clear to us, in an earlier parasha, Kitzisa, why does he repeat himself here? Why does Rashi comment at all? We've already learned it, surely, when we were back in Kisisa, because we were very, very bright 5 and 6-year-olds, and we were able to follow everything that was being taught, and therefore, under those circumstances, we know full well. So we would have, as a 5, 6-year-old, put up our hand and said, teacher, why is Rashi commenting here? He's already said the same thing before, which I'm sure all of you were about to do anyway. So, turning over the overleaf to the other page, next page. And if Rashi feared that the reader, you and I, because we're really advanced in age and our grey matter isn't what it was once upon a time, might have forgotten the explanation from that earlier parasha, which was studied admittedly some time ago, the syllabus in school takes some time, and he felt it necessary to remind us, then he should have at least remind us also what a chacham is. Here, he doesn't define a chacham. Here, he's only contemplating what is a navon. So that can't be the case that he's simply reminding us. Over there, he tells us what a chacham and navon is. Here, he's trying to struggle to tell us that he couldn't find a navon. We haven't got any real clarity yet over here why he chooses one and not the other. And what indeed is the analogy of the money changers? We haven't got to that yet. Question C, I'm not going to tackle, so I'm not going to read it out. So, the Rebbe, after pointing these questions out, proceeds to give us answers. And now we're getting to the answer section. In his comment to verse 15, the one where he said, I couldn't find any, says Rashi. Rashi writes that Moshe did not actually appoint any insightful men as judges because he simply was unable to find any. But this seems to contradict what was stated earlier. It was possible to find insightful men for the construction of the tabernacle. He did find them, Bezalel and Aholiav. They possessed both qualities. So why for the construction of the Mishkan such people could be found, but to appoint judges, such people could not be found with only one of the two qualities only. And to make it even a stronger question, if you look at the Rebbe's footnote at the bottom of our page, he points out there that, believe it or not, the choosing of the people for the construction took place on the exact same day as choosing the people to be judges. In other words, the individuals who seem to possess both qualities, Chacham and Navon, were selected on the same day, as Rashi says, but he couldn't find the Navon in the case of judges. Doesn't make any sense. They are there. So how can Rashi say couldn't be found? Are you understanding this little piece of mystery? Okay. Second column. Obviously, there were nevonim. Obviously, there were insightful men amongst the Jewish people, the type of insight needed, however, to construct the Mishkan, which is a different kind of insight needed to be a judge. And this is where the Rebbe begins to explain the differences between Chacham and Navon. One level of insight is where the person is able to clarify the additional details on his own after being given a general overview. In other words, here I am, I'm going to give you a general principle. I want you to construct this piece, and I'm going to give you a blueprint. Here's the plans, here are the instructions, now go and do it. It's very, very complex. It's very, very difficult. We're being very, very specific, and the Mishkan is very complex, but here are the blueprints, go and do it. For that, you are a Chacham if you manage to do it, and certainly they could do it. And you're a Navon also. But there's one level called that. This would have been sufficient for the construction of the tabernacle, since after hearing the general instructions from Moshe, like given the blueprints, there would have been certain details that the engineers would have been able to deduce themselves. Sure, not everything on the blueprint is clear, but we can use our common sense to be able to take the project to completion. A judge, on the other hand, requires a much deeper level of insightfulness, akin to lateral thinking. With this talent, a person is not only capable of filling in further details within the information transmitted to him by his teacher, but he's able to reapply that, what he has learned, in a variety of other situations and derive innovative and independent conclusions. Meaning, the Mishkan is the Mishkan. It's one blueprint for one product. To be a judge, you may study law, and you may have the facts at your fingertips, and you may know all the precedents from the English common law system, and you may have read all the legislation that has been passed in Parliament or Congress or the Senate or what have you. But you have to apply it to different human beings. It's not the one Mishkan. It's like many Mishkans. That's the quality of Navon. The quality of Navon is to be able to do more than simply apply the law. True, for the building of the Mishkan, we look for such people as well, because we wanted the most highest degree of cleverness to build the Mishkan. However, that kind of cleverness could be more easily found than the cleverness of judging. That cleverness of judging, Rashi says, Moses could not find amongst the qualities he sought. And therefore he had to appoint judges who didn't have that quality, and hence the verse 15 leaves it out. Now, if you and I were reading the Chumash, I don't know if we would have even noticed that the text leaves out this quality. Verse 13 mentions 3 or 4 qualities. Verse 15 mentions only 2 of those 3 qualities. We wouldn't have noticed it. But we would have read Rashi, and Rashi says, yeah, he's left it out because he couldn't find it. But why not? On the same day he did find it in another context, the Mishkan. They do exist. Says the Rebbe, because it's a different kind of cleverness that we need in this particular respect. We still haven't concluded the analogy to the money changer, which is now what he's going to proceed to say. So in order to clarify this distinction, Rashi cites the analogy of the 2 money changers. The rich money changer only works with materials he's given, analogous to a person who can calculate within the parameters of the information he's given. The Mishkan. In other words, that particular individual is someone who operates in known circumstances and is able to deduce to unknown circumstances in the one particular arena. However, the enterprising money changer goes out and does business with his own money, corresponding to the one who has to extrapolate beyond the context of the information at hand, corresponding to what the judge has to do. Thus, by citing the analogy, Rashi has explained to the reader why Moshe was unable to find any insightful men suitable to be judges, whereas he was able to find insightful individuals to construct the tabernacle. For the insight required to be a judge is a much rarer talent of truly innovative, independent thinking. Okay, we have solved the mystery, but there's still lack of clarity. And it doesn't come through here because we're reading small extracts of a whole sikha. What indeed is the difference between chacham and navon? So most of us around the table here have studied Chassidus and have come across chachma, bina, and da'at. Chachma, which is chacham, bina, which is navon, because navon's root is bina. And we've learned what the distinction is between chachma and bina. Chachma is creative. Chachma is the spark of inspiration, not necessarily in the context where we're talking about here in the Chumash, but in totality. Bina is developmental. In other words, when you have a moment of inspired insight, you haven't yet developed it. That's a chacham. A chacham is creative in that respect. You then take that spark and you develop it. You take it and create a concept, an idea, a theory. You give it length and breadth. You develop it. That's bina. And these are two very different aptitudes. Some people are stronger in chachma than their bina, because we have all of them. All of us possess both of these qualities and more. But some are stronger in chachma and some are stronger in bina. Architects, you might think, and possibly it's so, are stronger in chachma. They're more creative. Engineers, you might think, are more bina oriented. They take the concept and develop it in a way that it mechanically can work. So not directly within what we've learned, we do know the difference between chacham and navon from our studies of Chassidus as such. And that is, as far as I want to go, the Chumash. Any questions? Nice little analysis there. Speak now, forever hold your peace. Now I bludgeoned you into submission so quickly. Okay. But it's interesting, and it's interesting to see how you can make the Chumash come alive. Because, you know, when you're in shul and you're following the reading of the Torah and you're looking at the English, that's good. Because you get a sense of what's happening. But you don't necessarily enjoy it. To enjoy something, you have to go into the depth of it to understand it, to understand its implications. And that creates a thirst for more learning. In other words, a good teacher doesn't provide data to the classroom students. A good teacher awakens the curiosity of the students to start creating discoveries for themselves. And that's exactly what the Rashi Sikhs of the Rebbe attempt to do. And now we have a sense of joy in what we have done. Okay, so we now proceed to the second part of our evening together. It's nice to say evening because I've always been recording these in daytime. And now it's in real time, which is wonderful. Well, we're going to begin chapter 4. Now, if you are here for the first time in our class, don't be concerned, because what we're studying is a section of the Mishnah that deals with wisdom teachings of different Jewish leaders in history. But when I say history, we're talking about the history of the years around 500 BCE to about 250, 300 CE. That's the period. That's the period of the Mishnah's recording. The Mishnah was ultimately recorded in the early centuries of the Common Era. But usually Mishnah is a study of various laws that apply to everyday life. And yet here, what we're studying doesn't seem like that at all. They're actually teachings of very important little kernels of insights that the rabbis drew from their lives and presented to us. So each week it's a different set. So don't be concerned if that there's continuity. There's no continuity as such, except the accumulation of wisdom. So we're beginning chapter 4, which is a bit of a milestone. And in chapter 4, there are, to anticipate for you, 21 Mishnahs. So now we're going to run 21 weeks of Mishnahs, Mishnayos, and the first one we're going to tackle today. The style of our study here is we read the text, we don't comment too much about the text, we just translate it, and then we stop and ponder over it. Ben Zoma Omer. Ben Zoma says, Ben Zoma was one of the great rabbis of the period, and he spoke, he said, or he left a legacy, because these things were written after their passing. Eizechu Chacham. And it's amazing, and I didn't plan it that way. It's really asking the question which we did ask in the Chumash section, and just happens to coincide. Nothing happens to coincide, everything is deliberate, but nevertheless, Eizechu Chacham, who is a wise person? Halomed b'kol Adam. It's one who learns from every human being. Shenemar, and remember, all these teachings were always spoken on the basis of some teaching. They didn't just make it up out of thin air. Shenemar, because there's a text that says, Mikol melamda hiskalti. From all my teachers, I learned something. There's no such thing as not learning from somebody. That's the first phrase. Second phrase, Eizechu Gibor. Who is the true hero? Who is the truly strong individual? HaKovesh es Yitzrei. The one who is able to practice self-containment, self-control. Shenamar, there's a verse that testifies to this, that says, Tov erech apayim migibor. Someone who's able to control his anger is stronger than a physically strong individual. Or Moshe Baruche Meloched Ir. And someone who's able to rule his spirit is even a stronger person than the conqueror of a city. Okay? So now we've talked a little bit about what is a wise person and what is a strong person. Continuing, Ben Zoma says, Eizehu Asher. Who is a wealthy person? Hasameach bechelkei, the one who is happy with his lot, the one who's happy with what he or she has. How do you know that? Shenemar, there's a pasuk that says, Yegia kapecha kisechel ashrecha v'tovlach. If you are earning by the work of your hands, you will be happy and it'll be good for you. In other words, the satisfaction of earning something because of your own effort as opposed to being given a handout. And that is the truly happy person. A happy person is the person who's happy with what he's achieved with his own hands, happy with his lot. And why does it say both qualities at the end? They will be happy and it'll be good. Ashrecha, you'll be happy ba'olam hazeh in this world, but toivlach, and it'll be also good for you in olam haba, in the future world, in the olam haba. All right, we'll come to that. And the final phrase that Ben Zoma teaches, Eizechu mechubad. Who is the truly honorable individual? Hamechabed es habriyos, the one who honors all creatures. The one who honors every creature is the truly honored individual. Shenema, as it says, Kimechabdi achabed, I'll honor those who honor me, says Hashem, Uvoize yikalu, and I'll despise those who curse me. All right, that's the text. It's a longer text, but as we have found, the longer the text, sometimes the simpler the teaching, and the shorter the text, the more difficult is the teaching. So let's see if we can spend a bit of time thinking about what we're talking about here. Let's go back to the beginning. Ben Zoma. Strange. It doesn't say Rabbi. It doesn't give this person a title. We've come across that before. It just says Ben Zoma. Now we know Ben Zoma was a terribly erudite individual, extremely erudite, very, very knowledgeable, a scholar of renown. He was one of the 4 who entered the paradise. We've come across that before. What does it mean, enter the paradise? there were four rabbis who decided that they would rise to the higher labyrinth of spirituality on high and make discoveries about the nature of Olam Haba and the higher celestial beings. There were Ben Zoma, Ben Azai, Acher, and Rabbi Akiva. And you recall the results of that little expedition. Ben Azai died. Ben Zoma, our teacher, became mentally deranged. Acher became an apostate. And only Rabbi Akiva returned intact, which tells us that there are some dangers in that kind of an expedition. But anyway, we're talking about one of these four. And obviously this is prior to his state of derangement. And not only that, he must have been young. He hasn't yet got smicha. He doesn't yet have rabbinical title. That means he's younger of age. He must have also therefore stopped being able to be who he is much younger in life. And that's why he doesn't have a title. Another individual, another reason that's given why the first name's not mentioned, it just says Ben Zoma, the son of Zoma. Why didn't it give us the first name? His first name happened to be Shimon. Why didn't at least it say Shimon ben Zoma? And the answer is because at that time, coincidentally, there were four great scholars by the name of Shimon. And to distinguish them, they were all nominated by their surnames. And that way we could distinguish who we're talking about. That's another reason it's given. The other four, for your information, was Shimon ben Azaim, Shimon ben Nananas, Shimon of Timnas, and Shimon HaTeimani. Okay, so this is just some little things about Ben Zoma. Let's go to his teaching. Who was the wise person? The one who learns from everybody. If we recognize that everybody is here for a purpose, as you hear me say over and over again, no one is reincarnated or brought into being without this being a deliberate act by God, because you and I have something to offer that no one else can. Everyone possesses something distinctive. And if we meet somebody and try to gain what is it that's the ultimate merit of this person being here, we learn, we accumulate, we become wiser in life. Everyone has something to teach us. And if we adopt that attitude, we'll be very, very different in the way that we conduct our interpersonal relationships, whether they be ones of friendship, that's more normal, but ones even in business and in profession. When a client comes in, when a patient comes in, it's not a matter of chance. That person has come and walked through the door because you have something to learn from that person. And if you have your eyes and ears open with that kind of a mindset, that's what makes you a wise person eventually, because you're picking up the information. You're looking for it and picking it up. And that's how the Rebbe explains what Ben Zoma is teaching here. The Maggid of Mezritch says, you can even learn from a thief. You can learn from everybody. But he says specifically, even from a thief. Why? Take note of how a thief operates. Generally, he, maybe she, works under the cover of night. At night, overtime. We work hard. They work at nights. And the second thing the Maggid learns from a thief, that if you fail once, keep trying again. And we can learn then some attributes even from a thief. We can learn it from animals, as we have many other teachings, which we have in many traditions, what we can learn from an ant and what we can learn from a lion, etc., etc. Why? Because everything in creation is godly. Everything is a reflection. And in everything we can reflect godliness, and therefore we can learn from every single aspect. The Maggid also says you can learn from a baby, from an infant. Not only do infants learn from the parents, but the parents can learn from the infant. In which way? An infant is never idle, always trying to get himself or herself into trouble. Curiosity. We should never be idle. And also, when an infant wants something, it cries for it. I want it. Crying is a metaphor for prayer. We should always be asking the Maker for the things that we want. Don't hold back. Ask. Pray for the things we want. I read in one of my favorite writers and teachers, as you know, is Abraham Tversky. And Abraham Tversky, of course, became a leading psychiatrist and a clinic for addiction that he founded. He writes in his memoirs that when he was a first-year resident, a famous psychiatrist who had been extensively published and was world-renowned came to him, simply then a first-year resident, to ask him questions about a certain patient who was suffering depression. Later on, Tversky asked his superior, why did he come to me? This is the world's famous individual, and I'm only a first-year resident. And the superior said to him, well, you should understand that someone like him is not threatened. He's able to learn from everybody. He's beyond being someone who has any sense of pride to ask someone like you. You treated that patient. He wants to know about that patient, so he comes to you, even though you're a first-year resident. From everybody we can learn. Everybody. There's no exception to the rule. Okay, that's the first point. Those who learn from everybody. Any thoughts, questions, contributions? Then we proceed. Ezehu Gibor, who is the truly strong individual? Now, we usually associate strength with physical strength, but even then, not just physical strength, but psychic strength in the following way. People who control other people, people who have the capacity to exercise power over other people. That's sometimes perceived as strength. I think you and I know deep down that people who are controlling are actually weak. People who are controlling have low self-esteem. People who are controlling need everything to fall into place the way that they want it to fall into place, because otherwise they'll be afraid. So they exercise that kind of power, attempted power over people, in order to shore themselves up. So that is certainly one kind of strength, but it's not a true strength. It's really a sign of low esteem. Who is a strong person in history? We always look at Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses was a strong person, but that's not what he's known for. We've said on a number of occasions at the table that the quality that Moshe Rabbeinu is known for was humility, anivus, an anav, a humble individual, which of course we ask the question, why, how? He was a person of great, immense strength of character, a person who was a physically strong person, as we see in warfare, a person who actually did lead 600,000 families, Jewish people on top of it, for 40 years. Now that's better than Netanyahu. I mean, the point is, this was a very, very strong individual. And yet, humility is the quality that he's known for, because to be humble, what does that mean? To be humble is to know that your strength is a gift. It doesn't come from you. Your strength is something which is attributed from above. And therefore, you have a duty to utilize it, to be strong. There's nothing wrong with being strong. The important thing is to recognize that that attribute is a gift from above. And Moshe Rabbeinu, therefore, is both a gibor and an anav at the same time, a person of immense strength, and at the same time, a person of immense humility, and they coexist very, very well. Ultimately, to be a strong person means self-mastery, to be able to undo negative habits, to undo tendencies that we don't like within ourselves, to be able to practice self-restraint when temptation is very high. This is what Ben Zoma is really referring to. When you actually are able to exercise power over your Yetzer Hara, your negative inclination. Now, we have studied in Tanya, most of us, that what we're talking about when we say Yetzer Hara is the reference to the Nefesh Bahamis, our lower order self that seeks self-preservation. There's nothing wrong with self-preservation, but self-preservation doesn't have limits. How much do you want to get out of life? Is it just food, clothing, and shelter? Or is it the best food and the finest clothing and the most beautiful home? That's the work of the Yetzer. Comes along our higher order self and says, no. Self-preservation, yes, but only to a point, and then switch to altruism. That is strength. That is character. That's what Ben Zoma is referring to. Next quality, Ezehu Ashir. Who is the truly rich individual? We said the one who's satisfied with his lot. We've mentioned this also previously in other contexts. Comes along Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. Amongst the many things that is determined in the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is your income. Fixed income. Hashem gives you a fixed income for the coming year. And whatever you get in that coming year is exactly what's allocated to you. There's nothing you can do to increase that amount. And if you carry out your duty of working honestly, reasonably, then you'll get what you deserve. But you may not become the instant billionaire, and God forbid you'll be a pauper. What you get is what's allocated. Now, if we walk around with that kind of mindset, then we start looking at our circumstances in a very different light. It means somehow or other, this is what's best for us. And we recognize that, and we're satisfied with it. You remember the story of Reb Zusha, when a particular chassid comes up to the Maggid and says, please, teacher, tell me what's the meaning of suffering, poverty. And the Maggid says to him, I want you to go to a distant village where Reb Zusha lives. Who's Reb Zusha? You'll find him, very famous chassid, Reb Zusha. He's a Rebbe in his own right. And ask him, because he knows the answer to your question. Well, the chassid wanders to the distant village and expects to ask the first person and get an answer. Such a famous person living in a small village. Could you please tell me where Reb Zusha lives? Who? Reb Zusha? Never heard of him. Goes up to the next person. No idea. And so it goes on. And day and night, he's walking up the streets, looking and asking about Reb Zusha until he comes to one little lane, and there's a broken down house at the end of the lane. And he comes to the door and he knocks on the door, but the door doesn't even have a handle. So as he knocks on the door opens and he looks inside. And it's so bare. And there's an individual there who's got sores all over his body, his hand in a sling. And he says, do you know where Reb Zusha lives? And the man answers and says, I'm Reb Zusha. How come you're asking me? You're Reb Zusha? The Maggid asked me to come and see you. The Maggid, my own teacher as well. You know him. Wonderful. And now he's even more confused. The Maggid came, told me to ask you, what's the meaning of suffering? What's the meaning of poverty? So what does Reb Zusha answer? The Maggid asked you to come to me? I'm the wrong person. I've never suffered in my life, and I'm as wealthy as you want to be. That's it. It's all relativity, isn't it? Einstein did get it right at the end. So the point being that Ezehu Ashir, the one who is satisfied with his lot. You don't have to go to the extent of Reb Zusha, And Baruch Hashem, we don't. And as in our current circumstances, we're in lockdown, COVID, about to go into stage 4 and what have you, and people are really got their heads down and they're upset by everything. And hold on, as someone wrote recently, once upon a time, when we suffered, we really suffered. I wrote in a blog, my parents spent 6 years in the Holocaust. My mother-in-law spent 4 years in Auschwitz. That's a bigger plague than COVID-19. Here we are, we have food in our kitchens and we have electricity still operating, etc., etc. Sure, it's dangerous. Definitely we have to take steps. We have to protect ourselves. But on the other hand, we have to recognize a Zehu Asher, who's the wealthy person, the one who is satisfied with what we have. We should be satisfied. Baruch Hashem. Okay. One more little thing on that particular one, which I know time is pressing, but I want to say it. Do you remember how Mrs. Lot turned into a pillar of salt? You remember when Lot and his family were being saved by the angels and taken out of Sodom, they were instructed, do not look back, do not stop on the plains, flat lands, and run up to the mountains. The Rebbe explains it in this way. Don't look back. Don't judge yourself by the standard of Sodom. Don't look back and say, hey, now I know why I'm saved. I'm that much better. Don't stop on the plains. Don't be complacent. Don't stand still once you've escaped. Run to the mountains. Always aspire to grow in spirituality. What does that mean? Who's the rich person? The person who's satisfied with his lot. That's only in materialism, material needs. In spiritual needs, you can never be satisfied with your lot. You should always be growing and growing and growing and never be satisfied. And finally, a Zeichu Mechubad, who is the honored person, someone who honors all the creatures. Because as we said earlier, every creature is an expression of godliness. We're going to tackle this point today, again, not coincidentally, in the Tanya section, as soon as we finish the Pirkei Avos here. To honor people means you cannot, God forbid, hate them or despise them. And yet, there are circumstances where we don't like someone. They've done something nasty. They don't behave in a way which is befitting. How can you not dislike them? So the Rebbe was once asked that question, how can I not hate someone who is a cheat, who's a thief, let alone a murderer? And the Rebbe answered, everyone has two dimensions, their lower self and their higher self. What you need to do is love the good that's within them. Yes, you can despise the bad that's within them, but there's always something lovable about another Jewish person. Ahavat Yisrael means that there is always the potential of bonding. And that's why you should always honor every creature. Because not just people, but animals, as I said earlier, and insects and inanimate aspects all have an element of godliness with it. It's a projection on the screen of time and space, as I always say, of God. So everything is lovable, and therefore you should honor everything. And when you honor other people, the result will be you grow in honor, and others will automatically honor you at the same time. All right. That's our Pirkei Avos for today. Any questions there? Okay. At this stage, I would tell you to reach out and get a glass of water on the table and take some of the goodies that Leah prepared. It'll come. That day will come too.
Can I just interrupt? If anybody wants to comment, you just roll your cursor onto your own image and click unmute at the top.
Okay,
Laibl, can you hear me?
very well.
Okay, so my question is, how come Ben Zoma, who's not yet an ordained rabbi,
Yes.
gets a gong in Pirkei Avot?
Yeah, that tells you how precocious he actually was. As I said at the beginning in his little bio, he was, in his short lifetime of sanity, an amazing authority. In fact, there's a teaching that says that when he passed into ignominy, the whole level of quality of teaching went down. You know, sometimes you just get that kind of genius individual, and he was just one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, but you know, I don't know how old he really was. One version was that he was young, and that's why he wasn't ordained. And the other one that we said was, well, there were many Shimons, and therefore they were called by surname. But I suspect that if he were ordained, he would have had the title nevertheless.
Okay.
That's been the case all the way through.
Okay.
Okay. Let's turn to our third section of study, the Tanya. And we're about to embark on chapter 23. We are on your pages 94, 95. The chapter heading is there, right there in front of you, chapter 23, Chaf Gimel. What we've been saying is that when you have an extreme source of light, using an analogy, it's blinding. And when it's an extreme source of light and heat, like the sun, if the earth were even 5% closer to the sun, the result would be no life could exist on earth. If earth were 5% closer, nothing could exist. And if earth were 5% further away, nothing could exist, but that's not part of the analogy. Imagine then, what would be earth if it was right up close to the sun? Not 5%, but 95% closer to the sun. The short answer is, I assume it would disintegrate. It couldn't exist. Another analogy, if I take a candle and I teleport it to the sun, does the candle light have any meaning in the sun? And the answer is no, of course not. It's a ridiculous proposition. And yet we say everything that we see here, everything of existence, has godliness within it. The sun is inside it, so to speak, in the analogy. So how does it exist? So the way that the Alter Rebbe was explaining is that Hashem, godliness, put over itself a series of screens to screen out the intensity of the light until such point of screening that existence could come and be and subsist. That's the way we've explained it so far. Remembering this is but an analogy. It's not a statement of truth. But having said that, it means that everything in reality is connected to godliness. It's a bit like if you have a movie projector and you have a screen and all these things are happening on the screen, but as soon as you turn the projector off, everything disappears from the screen. A moment ago, there were 100 cowboys being surrounded by 1,000 Indians, and suddenly you turn it off and there's zero. That's what should be the case. If we are connected to godliness, the sun should be too strong for us to exist. So saying, no, we have these screens, and these screens screen off the brightness, so there is an illusion of existence that takes place. And yet in that very illusion lies the purpose of creation. That's where we got up to. And the point today we're studying is that Hashem's intention is in some shape or form fulfilled through mitzvot. We have to understand, and we will understand through today's session, what that means. Firstly, of course, we know that God doesn't have intention. God has no qualities. You can't even speak about God. But on the other hand, if we don't use words and analogies and metaphors, we don't have any opportunity. And there are certain basic truths about the design of the world. And therefore, from these truths about the design of the world, we can infer something about the notion of intention. That's where we begin. Din kol haniska la'el, in context of everything we've said so far, Yuvam v'ver heiter b'tosus biur, we can now understand with even further clarification, Masha Amru b'Zohar, the Zohar's teaching, the Raisa ukuchabricha kolichad, that Torah and God are one thing, is the one thing. Now, that can be taken as just a very nice statement. Here I have a book, and it's the work of the Torah, and I'm saying, hey, this is godly. Okay, that's a nice turn of phrase. He says, no, it's literally so. That the letters and spaces on paper and on parchment, the shape of the letters, the sounds that the letters are enunciated through the 5 parts of the mouth, there are letters to do with the lips, they're called the lips letters, the beit and the mem, for example, are pronounced with the lips. You've got the letters that are pronounced with the tongue, the lamet, the L, and onwards, the other 3 parts of the mouth. All these things are an expression of a description of God. Even the spaces in between the letters are a description of God. It's a bit like if I were to black out a bright searchlight and allow one pinhole to exist so that the searchlight behind the black screen would allow this one tiny ray to penetrate. The light that it would give might be terribly limited, and yet it's connected to the very source. It's what I said in my introduction. Things are screened off. So the screening off is so profound that we see it as paper and parchment with letters on it. But he's saying here, no, in the Kabbalah, we learn it's actually a godly expression of itself. We're going to learn what that means. Ubetikunim pirshu, and in another part of the Zohar, it says, the Remach Pikudim inun Remach Evarim Demalka, that the 248 positive commandments are in fact representative of the 248 organs of the king, of Hashem. And it's going to say the 248 commandments, the mitzvot, are, if you will, the same as our feet and our arms, our limbs. What the limbs are for us, mitzvot are for God. And he's going to draw this parallel and try to indicate why it's a true parallel. Lefisha ha-mitzvot heim pnimius ratzona elyon. Mitzvahs is an expression of God's intention, of God's will. The cheftzo hamiti, it's an expression of his most desired state. And they exist in every level of creation, in all the worlds, no matter what the level of the worlds are. Let me explain it this way. When you conduct a business, why are you conducting a business? To conduct the business, you have to buy inventory. You have to buy stock. Is your whole intention of your business to buy stock? No, that's just a process in the business. What do you do then? You take inventory. Is that what the purpose of the business is? That you count how many widgets you have? No, of course not. That's only part of the process. Then you conduct a sales program, a sales policy. Is that the purpose of the business? No. You may not even like the idea of selling, but you know you have to do it Because what you want to do is you want to make a profit. Is that what you really want? No, you don't just want a profit, because you know that making a profit is not the bottom line. The bottom line is what the profit will give to you. What does the profit give to you? What does money give to you? What does assets give to you? Security, that's what I want. Pleasure, that's what I want. In other words, the bottom line of what we really desire is many levels removed from the processes. So what we're learning here is mitzvahs is the bottom line, Hashem's bottom line. But what does God have to do to create mitzvahs? He has to create a universe. He has to create an earth. He has to create a human being. He has to create a human being that's got the duality within. He's got to create around the human being all the animal kingdom and inanimate kingdom, etc. He's got to implant in the human being curiosity. All these levels. And each one of them is not the very purpose. The very purpose is the mitzvot. We haven't got to the answer why that might be. That's not what we're going to necessarily have today. But the point being that the same relationship that you and I have to the things of the world, and ultimately there's processes. What do I really want? I want satisfaction and I want pleasure. I want security. These are bottom line things that a human being aspires to. There's many ways that I have to do to get that. So Hashem also has many ways of getting to Hashem's bottom line, which is the mitzvahs. That's the point we wanted to make. All the creation of the world, all the sustenance, all the forces that come into being are only for the singular goal of mitzvot shel tachtonim, that human beings carry out mitzvahs, kanoida, as is well known. Benimtza, what's the result of this? Shemasa hamitzvahs v'kiyuman hu levush hapnimi lepnimius ratzon ha'elyon. That the action that you and I do of a mitzvah becomes the medium, the levush, the clothing, the medium, the innermost medium for the innermost desire of Hashem. Because as a result of that action, of that mitzvah, we're carrying out Hashem's will in the world as such. That's why we call mitzvahs the limbs, the organs, in the same way as we have limbs and organs. Why? Why is that a perfect analogy? Just as organs, just as our limbs are completely subservient to our wish. When you want something, when you want to pick up something into your hand, I want to pick up this watch. Is there any lag time? Does your hand say, hold on, let me think if I am active enough and I will pick it up now, let me see. Oh, yes, I can pick it up. Of course not. There's no lag time whatsoever. When I have a desire, my limbs carry it out automatically without any delay whatsoever. And that's what he says now. When a person wants to stretch out his hand, or ragloi, or his leg, and take it from the the leg and the hand respond immediately, without any responses, without any argument, without any instructions, and with no delay, immediately. At the very instant that he wanted to do it. Finally, that's by way of analogy, just as the organs of the human being are completely united, in our case, with our soul. Wanting this comes from deep within the soul, and the body responds immediately. The action of animating and doing mitzvahs, are likewise an immediate state of response to the King of Kings, to the body of the King of Kings, Hamalubashba, that is enclosed within his organs and limbs, which are the 248 mitzvahs. But Nasal Mamash Kaguf Kanashama. And then they become that in relation like a body is to a soul. What's the point that he wanted to say? He wanted to say that the most desirous things of Hashem is the mitzvahs. And that desire is the bottom line. In order to carry out that bottom line, Hashem had to create a whole world, a universe, galaxies, and the micro world, subatomic world, Higgs boson, everything had to be created in order that mitzvahs will take place. That was the bottom line. And the relationship of mitzvot to Hashem is the relationship of our limbs to our desires. When I want something, my body immediately responds. Mitzvahs are the manner in which you and I can carry out Hashem's desire. And that's the analogy that's being made here. So this is a very different take on the notion of mitzvot, because the way that you and I have been taught about mitzvot is that mitzvot are aspects of doingness of life that provide a person with structure. It allows us to have a self-discipline. They carry out religious functionality of some shape or form. And the truth of the matter is they do all that, but only in passing. The ultimate purpose of a mitzvah is Hashem wants it. It's as simple as that. Why Hashem should want a mitzvah? Okay, that's a question which we can't probably answer at all. You have to enter into God's mind in order to answer that kind of a question. But just because I want the glass of water, the example I've said in previous occasions, I want a glass of water, and the fact that you tell me you don't need any more water, that in no way lessens my wish for the glass of water. And when you carry out my wish and you give me the glass of water, the result is that our relationship is strengthened. If you say to me, hold on, I don't want to give you the glass of water, then our relationship is weakened. Likewise here, Hashem says, give me a glass of water. I'm calling it mitzvot. What do I? Am I going to respond, hey, why do you want mitzvot? They're ridiculous. Some of them are not even understandable. I have no idea. But that's what I want. Our relationship is strengthened when I carry out the will of Hashem. It's as simple as that. I imagine that you all usually listen to my class in daytime hours. And now that I've reintroduced evenings, you're a little bit, what's the right, sedated for the class. And therefore giving me such an easy run compared to what you usually do for me. Tackle me head on. Or are we just learning about the dynamics of Zoom, and it's got different dynamics than in true life as such? Anyway.
Right. So Rabbi Laibl, is it almost like in our performing the mitzvot, we're like the neurons firing and causing the limbs of Hashem to move to carry out Hashem's will?
I'm not sure if that's exactly the analogy, because that almost attributes to us that we are the ones who are doing it or wanting it. There probably is an overlap. There may be an overlap in what you say. At the end of the day, you and I doing the mitzvah become part and parcel of the oneness and the unity of Hashem. I'm the medium of doing that mitzvah, then I become the living expression of the mitzvah itself. I'm the one doing the mitzvah, and therefore I become part of the mitzvah, so I become a limb of Hashem's body. Perhaps. I'm not saying that definitively.
Can I
Like,
ask? Sorry.
Laibl?
Yeah.
how do we know what effect, or does it have an effect on Hashem by us doing the mitzvot? You say it's his will, it's what he desires.
Yes.
Does it affect, what effect does us doing the mitzvot have on him?
Yes. We can't even ask that question, let alone answer that question. Although the question from a human point of view is absolutely legitimate. Remember some weeks ago when we were talking about whether in fact we can use anthropomorphism, whether in fact we can use human terms to describe God. And the Rambam, who used those terms, was being challenged. And the Kabbalists agreed with him that you can use anthropomorphisms up to a point. And the point was the level of Atzilus, the world of Atzilus. And beyond that, no longer can you even use that. So yes, we can talk about making God happy as a simplistic phrase up to the level of Atzilus. But what do we mean when we say up to a level of Atzilus, I can say that, and after that, I can't say that? That too is almost beyond understanding. Is it true or is it not true? But remembering that you and I are talking from a spatial dimension and from a time dimension. You and I are talking through space and time. So these things make sense. How do they filter beyond there? How do they filter beyond time and space? How is it interpreted there? Is there interpretation there? What is it there? Unknowable, absolutely unknowable.
So the question is, how does a finite connect with the infinite?
Yes, and we say that we've been given a set of instructions of what the infinite wants, and only because those set of instructions were given do we know anything. Otherwise, we know nothing. We know nothing about creation. We know nothing about the creator. It's only to the extent that the creator chose to allow a peek of itself through a medium called the Torah. And therefore, we do what we do because that's the peak that we've been given, and that's whereby we can carry out our functionality in life in a direction that we know is in accord with the intention of creation. But without that, we wouldn't know. And that's, I'm going to, in a few weeks, there's a course in Jewish ethics and morality that's going to be publicized. It's a five session course that I'm giving. And one of the first session is there such a thing as Jewish ethics and morality? And I argue in the opening session, there isn't. There's no such thing as Jewish ethics and morality, even though the whole course is called Jewish ethics and morality. Because if you look at what ethics and morality is in history throughout life, it's always been thoroughly inconsistent. What is moral and ethical in one period of history is no longer considered ethical and moral in another period of history. And I give examples of that. And therefore, it's always relativistic. So what's ethics and morality? It's just a changeable sense of what the cultural norm perceives. So what's Jewish ethics and morality? Also, it doesn't exist. It's us copying God. To do the right thing is to act godly. To do the wrong thing is to act ungodly. When you do a mitzvah, you're doing the right thing. When you're doing a very, doing the wrong thing. And that's ethics and morality. But I've simplified it. I've only given you a teaser.
Laibl, you said there are 240, not you said, but there are 248 to do mitzvot.
Yes.
My question is, one, are they all equal in importance? If not, if there is a scale, can you give us, please, the first 10 mitzvot to do on the scale?
There's two answers that are given. The Rambam says you can infer the relative importance of the mitzvot by the consequences that are given in not doing them. So the so-called consequence of not doing this is that, the consequence of this, that, I mean from a divine consequence, what commonly we would call in childish terms punishments. So the more severe the punishment, the more important. That's the way the Rambam teaches. But most others say no, that there's no way known that we can weigh up the relative merit of doing what's called a minor mitzvah and a major mitzvah. There's no such thing as a minor and a major mitzvah. And this is basically what we subscribe to, that we can't tell.
Okay. The next thing is where we all live in really unusual times and physical things are taking away from us. Many people are losing jobs and other values in the physical life. And I think that doing mitzvot is, especially this time, is the most important way to lift people up from the low state, from a state of coma that they experience currently. Because as you know, when we do mitzvot, it makes us feel good. And it doesn't mean that you do mitzvot to feel good, but it's not a crime to feel good when you do mitzvot. And it's really the best possible way to lift ourselves above the current energy level.
Everyone needs to have a sense of achievement. Everyone needs to have a sense of fulfillment. Everyone needs to feel that what they're doing has some universal truth to it, that it's worthwhile, even if no one notices, even if no one sees it. And what you say, therefore, is very important, because most of the things that society places value on are the things that have an effect and are perceived in the sight of everybody. Judaism teaches that the things of merit, which we call mitzvot, may never be actually seen in your action. An individual lights a Shabbos candles living alone by herself and by himself, because a man lights Shabbos candles if he's alone also. No one knows. And yet that's an amazing sense of achievement. Now, that sense of achievement obviously can only operate if they actually believe in that. And that therein comes the whole question of how does a person come to a belief as such? But we can set that aside for elsewhere. So yeah, I concur with you. And when a person accepts that a mitzvah is something very important, then when they carry it out, then they recognize the great sense of achievement and change they create in the world. And they certainly do. All right, I'm going to call it quits for you. And you can give me feedback and tell me if there's any changes you want to the Zoom session, the style or anything whatsoever. And next week, we'll again meet in this format.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laibl. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Shabbat shalom to everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye, Ben. Shabbat shalom.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.